Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are really diving deep into Ottessa Moshfegh's 2018 novel, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This is a book it's gained an almost mythical status in discussions about modern alienation.
The core concept this book helps us explore is, I think, maybe one of the most provocative in contemporary literature.
Yeah.
It's what happens when an individual, someone with, almost total financial immunity,
Right, complete privilege.
decides that the only path to sanity, to self-renewal, is just through a year of continuous pharmaceutical-induced oblivion. We're watching this radical, very privileged act of rejection against a system that's built entirely on constant productivity, on performance and transaction.
And this is exactly where the systems analysis comes in. How does that very system, the one that includes wealth management, the medical and industrial complex, rigid social expectations, how does it not only facilitate this extreme hibernation, but then eventually resist it or even exploit it? The novel, and it's set in this kind of feverish, opulent quiet of pre-9/11 New York City, it gives us a chillingly prescient critique. It really speaks directly to the deep-seated cultural anxieties we face today.
You mean things like burnout?
Burnout, the commodification of mental health, the search for a radical reset, and that relentless pressure to perform wellness, especially in our hyper-connected, always-on culture.
So our mission today is really a systems-level analysis. We're not here to, assign ideological blame to the narrator for her choices or to critique the ethics of her wealth.
No, not at all.
Instead, we want to dissect the mechanisms, the incentives, and the outcomes of these systems of wealth, of vanity of labor that enable this total catastrophic withdrawal. We want to understand how the machine is built to allow certain people to check out entirely and what happens when they try to come back.
Okay, so let's start with some context. Maybe begin with the author herself. Ottessa Moshfegh is a really notable American fiction writer from New England, and she's known for this unflinching gaze at characters who often operate on the fringes of what we'd call acceptable behavior.
Yeah, when you look at her body of work, you see these recurring themes of just profound isolation, self-disgust, and characters who engage in radically detached or self-destructive behavior. She wrote the novella Maglue, which won the Believer Book Award, and the novel Eileen, which was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. So she has this established reputation for presenting characters who are really uncomfortable in their own skin. But what My Year of Rest and Relaxation does is it takes that detachment and places it inside the stark opulence of Manhattan's elite, where suffering is, supposed to be minimal.
That contrast is absolutely essential. The misery is happening in an East 84th Street apartment, an apartment that was purchased in cash.
Right.
And the timeline, the precise timeline of the story is critical to understanding the specific atmosphere she's trying to capture. The narrator kicks off her chemical shutdown in mid-June of 2000, and her journey wraps up right around the January 20th inauguration of George W. Bush.
And, crucially, her re-entry into cognitive reality when she sort of wakes up happens right before the attacks of September 11, 2001. That placement, that specific timing, it captures the unique tension of pre-9/11 New York City.
It really does.
The city felt invincible. It was obsessed with status and speculation. You have the cynical, capital-driven art scene of Chelsea on one hand, and the luxurious, sterile environment of the Upper East Side, specifically Yorkville, on the other. It was a period just before digital life became completely pervasive. There's no social media, no iPhones.
Exactly, and that makes her chemical disconnection an even more radical, almost anachronistic act. She's disconnecting from an analog version of hyper-capitalist pressure.
That's a great way to put it.
And this brings us to, I think, the central thesis of the book. The idea that the self, having been fundamentally corrupted by all the transactional demands of contemporary society, whether it's vanity, striving, careerism, or relationship performance, that this self requires complete and total erasure.
She doesn't see this as therapy or healing in the way we normally think about it. It's more like a necessary demolition.
It is. The narrator views her hibernation not as a breakdown or a collapse, but as a proactive self-preservational strategy. It's almost like a factory resetting itself.
Yeah.
And she says this very clearly, stating, "I knew in my heart that when I'd slept enough, I'd be renewed, reborn." Her past life, which was full of these meaningless transactions, bad grief, shallow relationships, it all needed to be wiped away, to become but a dream so she could start over without regret, without the accumulated shame of the old self.
That is such an incredibly appealing concept in our current age of anxiety, isn't it?
Hmm.
The idea of a radical pharmacological reset, just scrubbing the hard drive of your consciousness. But what the book forces us to reckon with is that the feasibility of this reset rests entirely on specific systemic factors that support her ability to disengage. It's a luxury product.
Yeah.
That brings us directly to our core insights, starting with the unshakable foundation that makes this whole experiment possible. Financial immunity as the basis for radical disconnection. This is the first and most critical insight.
Absolutely. The narrator is 24, recently orphaned, and crucially, independently wealthy. And Moshfegh is so careful to describe her passive income stream in excruciating detail, showing us exactly how she can avoid ever needing a boss or a paycheck.
It's the sheer automation of her wealth that's so striking, isn't it? Her apartment on East 84th Street was paid for in cash from her inheritance. So that's already a huge layer of insulation. But beyond that, she had already prepaid a year of property taxes on both that apartment and on her dead parents' sprawling house upstate.
And that upstate property isn't just sitting empty either. It's rented out, and the rent money flows directly into her checking account via direct deposit every single month.
Right.
This means her primary housing costs, property taxes, and a steady stream of passive income are all running on autopilot. They require zero cognitive effort from her. We're also told her investments are managed silently by her deceased father's financial advisor, who sends her these quarterly statements she never even reads. She just throws them away.
She calculates that she has enough in savings to live for a few years, as long as I didn't do anything spectacular. But the irony is that her entire year of rest is spectacular in the sense that it's a radical luxury most people can't even begin to fathom because they're living paycheck to paycheck.
Her wealth creates this impervious protective bubble. It allows her to exit the social contract entirely without the immediate consequence that 99% of the population would face, homelessness, starvation, or just immediate destitution.
But the critique doesn't just stop at the wealth itself. It extends to how she interacts with the welfare state.
That's maybe the most cynical part of this systemic exploitation. She maintains unemployment status just by making a weekly automated call and pressing 1 for yes when the robot asks if she made a sincere job effort.
And she is not sincere. She is not looking for a job at all.
Not in the slightest. Yet she exploits this basic safety net that's designed for the truly needy, and she uses that marginal income stream to cover the endless co-payments on her massive supply of prescriptions. It really showcases how privilege can effortlessly exploit or subvert even the most basic systemic checks. It's financial abuse of the welfare system, albeit on a small scale, but it underlines her total contempt for the necessity of labor.
And this contempt, it defines her consumer behavior, which is the ultimate outsourcing of basic existence. Her needs are met entirely transactionally. She gets delivery from the local Thai restaurant, endless tuna salad platters from the diner, and a weekly laundry service.
Until she abandons the laundry service entirely.
Right. She just opts instead to throw out dirty clothes, including designer lingerie that she doesn't even remember ordering in the first place.
That detail about the dirty clothes is so crucial. It's not just laziness, it's a symptom of a total devaluing of material goods because money has lost all meaning to her. She doesn't need to conserve or care for anything. Even just gathering the clothes to be clean is too much trouble. Her relationship with the outside world is reduced to these transactional consumptions, and she literally doesn't even have to be conscious for the delivery system to function and keep feeding her.
This financial insulation is the engine. It transforms what would be an immediate catastrophic descent into poverty and a mental health crisis for most people into a luxury sabbatical, a chemically induced wellness retreat.
Yeah.
It tells us that radical personal freedom in our society is fundamentally tied to radical wealth. So if wealth is the protective wall around her hibernation, the medical system acts as the highly effective yet totally corrupt door to the other side. Let's talk about insight too. The medical system as a drug dispenser, not a healer. This is all centered on her psychiatrist, Dr. Tuttle.
The relationship with Dr. Tuttle is one of the most darkly humorous and damning critiques in the entire novel. It's an exercise in transactional absurdity. The narrator finds Dr. Tuttle's name randomly in the yellow pages, the only psychiatrist who happened to answer the phone late one Tuesday night.
And from the very first meeting, Dr. Tuttle is presented as fundamentally compromised.
Yeah.
She wears this foam neck brace, supposedly from a taxi accident, and her office is surrounded by bizarre clutter. She is distracted, unprofessional, and instantly paranoid. She asks the narrator upon their first contact, "Are you FBI, CIA, DEA, NASA.
It immediately establishes that this is not a clinical relationship based on care or diagnosis. It is purely a transaction based on the narrator's need for chemicals and the doctor's desire for cash flow. The narrator lies, claims insomnia and a need to escape her grief, and Dr. Tuttle obliges instantly, practically pulling out her prescription pad mid-sentence.
The sheer volume and variety of pills prescribed become the central mechanism of the novel's plot, and it reinforces this idea that the solution to existential pain is always pharmaceutical, regardless of the diagnosis. We see her cycling through trazodone, Ambien, Nembutal, lithium, Haldol, Valiums, Libriums, Plastils, Noctex, Miltown, Seroquel, and Formoterol, plus experimental drugs.
It's a pharmaceutical cocktail that just crosses all these therapeutic categories. Heavy sedatives, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, all poured into a 24-year-old woman who's claiming simple grief and a desire to sleep.
Yeah.
But the deeper systemic critique lies in how Dr. Tuttle manages this supply through something she calls eco-scripting.
Let's pause on that idea of eco-scripting, because it's a perfect lens into insurance-driven healthcare, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Tuttle is openly gaming the system. She admits she knows how to play into their little games with insurance companies.
She explains that she prescribes drugs based not on their primary therapeutic purpose, but on their side effects, specifically those side effects that align with the patient's supposed and often fabricated symptoms. Or she'll prescribe drugs that fall into specific, less scrutinized insurance categories.
So she might give a migraine drug to induce relaxation, or an antipsychotic for insomnia.
Exactly. And she does it specifically to ensure maximum coverage and avoid red flags that might alert the insurance providers to her patient's actual goal, which is nonstop sedation.
It just transforms diagnosis from an ethical practice into a financial strategy. The patient becomes a vehicle for maximizing insurance billing. Dr. Tuttle treats the narrator not as a person to be healed, but as a pharmaceutical test case, an academic curiosity who can afford her cash-based methods.
And this transactional dynamic, cash payments, post-dated checks, no questions asked, it exposes a medical system that's been corrupted by financial incentives, where the priority is maximizing insurance billing and dispensing chemicals rather than any genuine therapeutic intervention.
There is a chilling moment early on where the narrator mentions that her mother died from mixing alcohol and sedatives.
And Dr. Tuttle's reaction is just so cold, completely lacking in professional alarm or empathy. She replies, "People like your mother give cytotropic medication a bad reputation."
Wow.
That line is a key to her entire philosophy. She views drugs as effective in curing mental illness precisely because they impair our judgment. Her core philosophy is that the modern age has forced us to live these unnatural, hypervigilant, hyperproductive lives. Busy, 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 go, go, go. And therefore, a chemical escape that shuts down judgment is the only logical, albeit radical, prescription. If reality is the disease, chemical erasure is the cure.
The reality the narrator desperately wants to erase also includes her former workplace. Let's turn our attention to Insight 3. Focusing on the art world as a hyper-capitalist, aesthetically driven system.
Before her hibernation, the narrator worked as a gallery girl at a place called Ducat in Chelsea. And again, the numbers tell the systemic story here. Her salary was minimal, only $22,000 a year.
Which in New York City is nothing.
It's nothing. So it makes it clear that the job was never about necessity or even viable employment. It was purely about status and performance, and it was entirely subsidized by her inherited wealth.
Her primary value to the gallery system was purely aesthetic. She was tall, thin, blonde, and pretty, so she functioned essentially as fashion candy and hip decor. Her job was mostly just sitting behind a desk, ignoring visitors, and playing dumb to project this aura of jaded exclusivity that the wealthy clients crave.
And the art itself is described as utterly cynical and derivative. She calls it canned counterculture crap, manufactured strictly for branding and cachet. The prime example of this is the gallery's star artist, a man named Pingxi.
Pingxi is so central to this critique. He's a young man known for his wildly expensive ejaculate splatter paintings, and these abstract works are given the most bombastic, grand, and often wildly inappropriate political titles. Titles like Decapitated Palestinian Child or Bombs Away, Nairobi.
The titles have absolutely nothing to do with the actual physical art, which is just abstract expressionism. But the grand political branding gives them this manufactured political depth and faux subversiveness that justifies their high prices and shock value.
It's speculation and outrage.
Yes, the system monetizes moral confusion.
So the narrator explicitly chooses to forget this entire environment, the greed and gossip and cocaine of the art world, because she sees it as entirely interchangeable with financial institutions.
Yeah.
She views the art market indistinguishable from the stock market because, as she says, speculation and opinions drove not only the market but the products.
Right. The value isn't any intrinsic artistic merit. It's entirely speculative, driven by the whims of wealthy collectors and the manipulative marketing genius of dealers like her boss, Natasha.
And her eventual dismissal, which was over mixing up a shipment of press materials for Art Basel, she treats it almost as a relief. It's confirmation that the entire endeavor was meaningless, superficial labor. It was a system that valued her body as an ornament and intellectual work as a cynical marketing tool. So when she failed at the most basic administrative task, the system ejected her, confirming its lack of actual substance. The performance of professional life is one thing, but the performance of social life is another entirely. The narrator's foil, and maybe the most heartbreaking character in the book, is her best friend, Riva. This leads us to Insight 4. Riva is the embodiment of social performance and the wellness industrial complex.
Riva is the mirror reflecting all the systemic demands that the narrator is wealthy enough to reject. Riva is desperately trying to adhere to every societal standard of success and wellness, even as it's destroying her. She's constantly anxious, often bulimic, deep in debt from maxed out credit cards. She's obsessively focused on brand names even when she's wearing knockoffs. And she's constantly seeking this manufactured life wisdom through self-help paradigms.
She is the walking advertisement for monetized anxiety. We hear about her confidence-boosting CDs, her devotion to Oprah quotes, and her aggressive fad diets fasting on prune juice and baking soda, drinking salt water. Her life is just this relentless cycle of self-improvement that never yields any improvement, only more debt and more anxiety.
And the narrator observes all the striving. Riva's working out, her affair with her married boss Ken, her pursuit of the right clothes, and sees it as a futile exercise in conformity. Riva constantly pushes the narrator to face the music and judges her, rubbing my nose in her moral high ground, desperately trying to validate her own suffering by demanding the narrator suffer productively too.
Riva's frequent catchphrase, whenever the narrator experiences any advantage or peace, no matter how small, is "no fair." It's an expression of her deeply ingrained belief that if she works harder and suffers more, she should be rewarded.
Right. And the narrator, who has done none of the work, has all the rewards. It's the ultimate failure of the meritocratic narrative.
Crucially, the narrator admits that Riva is an analgesic. That's such a powerful and chilling psychological assessment. Her whiny, moronic drone, she says, clings the palate of my mind.
Riva's existence, which is defined by her desperate attempts to manage her own anxieties through performance and consumerism, is so superficial that it transforms the narrator's deep existential pain into fluff that could be easily dismissed.
So the friend is literally a coping mechanism. Riva's predictable, manageable misery validates the narrator's radical withdrawal. It confirms her belief that the external world is meaningless because the person who is trying the hardest is still suffering profoundly.
Exactly. The narrator can look at Riva and say, if striving only leads to that, why should I even bother?
Yeah.
Riva is, therefore, as much of a chemical aid as the pills she takes. This systematic use of drugs to manage the external world, it eventually leads to our fifth insight, blackout behavior and the systemic loss of control.
This is where the plot really turns from passive sleeping into this active yet unconscious participation in the world. The experimental drug infamidorol is the key. It's the powerful sedative that Dr. Tuttle provides to defeat the narrator's final, stubborn bouts of insomnia.
But the side effect is prolonged blackouts, periods of up to 3 days where the narrator is physically active but later has no memory of what she did. This is profoundly disturbing because she is moving through the world, interacting with systems, but she's entirely absent from her own life.
And during these blackouts, she engages in these mundane but very costly activities. Booking spa appointments, sleep shopping at Barney's and Saks. She wakes up to boxes filled with cashmere socks, designer jeans, or expensive jewelry she doesn't want or need. She even rearranges her furniture, moving heavy items, and only realizes it happened when she wakes up and her apartment is in a different physical orientation.
It demonstrates that the systems of consumption and transaction are so pervasive that she can engage with them unconsciously. The retail and service industries are perfectly happy to process her money, even when she's fundamentally chemically absent.
The ultimate expression of this chemically induced loss of control, though, is her contract with Ping Ji.
Right. Having quit her job at his gallery, the narrator grants Ping Ji carte blanche to use her as a model for his art while she is blacked out. The single bizarre condition is that he must leave no trace of his activities, no clues, no mess ensuring her naive state remains intact when she wakes up.
This is a transaction that commodifies the unconscious female body for the sake of high art, but with a unique twist. Pingxi is exploiting a vulnerability that the system of extreme pharmacological solutions enabled. He views her not as a person but as a concept, the passive, sleeping muse, a critique of capitalist exhaustion.
And he tries to justify this exploitation by claiming his art is about those brainwashed by a system that doesn't give a shit about who we really are.
But the narrator, in her desire for complete erasure of her old self, accepts this exploitation as a necessary functional part of achieving her goal. Total disconnection from the self that existed before the rest? It's a cynical transaction that both parties seem to understand.
The irony is so rich. The attempt to gain ultimate freedom from societal constraints leads her to the ultimate act of exploitation by a representative of the very system she despises, all while she is chemically muted.
Our sixth and final core insight really deals with the emotional architecture that preceded and, I guess, necessitated her hibernation, the cycle of detached relationships.
The narrator's romantic and familial history is characterized entirely by emotional distance, cynicism, and transactional intimacy. She grew up in an environment where true connection was viewed with suspicion.
Her recurring ex-boyfriend, Trevor, who's a finance guy at Fuji Bank, is the prime example of this transactional intimacy. He dates older women, depletes his self-esteem in those relationships, and then he returns to the narrator specifically to reboot his confidence.
Right. And he values her only when she is weak, noting that lust and pity went hand in hand.
When she attempts to introduce genuine emotion, confessing that she loves him, he just dismisses it clinically, asking, how is that relevant? He eventually breaks up with her by offering this self-serving rationalization that she's too young and immature, and he needs someone who won't require him to support her emotional development.
He wants a transaction that serves his emotional maintenance, not a partnership.
And this cynicism is inherited directly from her parents. Even her memory of them frames attachment cynically. Her father, who is a scientist, described oxytocin clinically as just the hormone that bonds couples.
While her mother, Ever the esthetician, warned that oxytocin was the thing that's going to make you crazy, she advised that men are more rational and don't attach as easily and would ultimately use women and then throw them out with yesterday's trash. The narrator concludes early on that non-transactional love or genuine empathy was never part of her upbringing.
And the specific details of the mother's fixation on surface vanity are so heartbreakingly specific. We learn that her mother, a former beauty queen, used hemorrhoid cream to reduce swelling under her eyes.
Yes.
She refused to engage in domesticity because she believed it would cement her failure as a beauty queen, prioritizing eternal aesthetic performance over any meaningful relational role.
That detail is profound. It shows how even the most intimate foundational relationship mother-daughter was defined by the pressures of aesthetic performance and the avoidance of reality. If your mother refuses to engage in domestic life because it threatens her status as a beauty queen, you learn that life is always a performance and connection is always secondary to appearance.
This detachment extends even to her friendship with Riva. She needed Riva's whiny, moronic drone to cleanse her palate, yet she simultaneously resents her for striving. Their relationship is a complex circuit of resentment, memory, jealousy, denial, indicating that even her closest bond is fundamentally dysfunctional and driven by comparison and psychological use. This entire web of failed transactional intimacy is what she is chemically escaping. Now that we've unpacked the core mechanisms, let's try to map these interactions onto a systemic framework. If the protagonist is attempting to create a complete personal reset, what we're calling a hibernation system, what are the inputs and actors that make it run and maintain its stability?
The system requires specific, self-reinforcing inputs to maintain its isolated, harmful, yet functional state. The key actors are numerous. You have inherited wealth, which provides the passive income stream and housing security. You have Dr. Tuttle, the highly unethical medical gatekeeper. Pharmaceuticals, which are the primary tools of cognitive erasure. Pingxi, the exploitative artist who utilizes her unconscious body. And Riva, who acts as the external social pressure and mirror of conformity, which in turn validates the narrator's escape.
Let's focus on the incentives and the mechanisms driving their respective behaviors. Wealth and privilege, as we discussed, create this absolute protective bubble. It automates survival through direct deposit rent, prepaid taxes, and automatic bill payments. It completely removes the necessity for physical or cognitive participation in the economy. The inertia of her wealth just keeps her alive without any effort.
The pharmaceuticals are designed specifically to impair judgment, which Dr. Tuttle ironically views as effective in curing mental illness. What's particularly revealing is the feedback loop the narrator herself maintains using substances. She doesn't just take depressants. She uses caffeine not for energy to work, but as her exercise.
She takes caffeine and these high-octane stimulants to catalyze anxiety to the point where she must crash and sleep again, often for days. It's a deliberate self-sabotaging loop between stimulants and depressants, reinforcing her chemical dependency. She's actively using one system, stimulants, to necessitate her deeper engagement with the other, sedatives.
And Pinji's incentive is purely conceptual exploitation. He sees the narrator's wealth and detachment as raw material for his art. By using her as the passive muse, the subject who is totally opted out, he creates sleeping nudes in his mind, justifying his exploitation under the guise of intellectual critique. His art relies on her victimhood, which the system of wealth enables.
And Riva's incentive is adherence to norms and the maintenance of her own moral superiority. She desperately needs the protagonist to fail or return to the labor market so Riva's striving can feel validated. She constantly pushes the protagonist to face the music, offering these tired self-help paradigms. You need to be watching movies that are going to cheer you up, maintaining the relentless pressure for women to be thin, stylish, and happily employed, thereby reinforcing the very system the narrator is running from.
So what narratives or assumptions are shaping all these decisions? The prevailing assumption, and it's shared by both the narrator and Dr. Tuttle, is highly critical. The modern age has forced us to live unnatural lives, busy, 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 go, go, go.
Right.
The solution then is radically clear. You have to escape the physical and psychic constraints of this unnatural, hyperproductive state. The narrator seeks a new spirit, believing her isolation is the only way to achieve genuine renewal.
The feedback loop just reinforces this isolation. The narrator's ability to live without consequences, all because of her wealth, confirms her deep-seated belief that the outer world is optional and meaningless, driving her deeper into pharmacological isolation. This system rewards her withdrawal by demanding absolutely nothing of her.
And conversely, the system actively punishes Riva's participation. Riva's constant striving, the diets, the affair, the job transfers, the consideration of an abortion, it only leads to more anxiety, more debt, and more emotional distress. The juxtaposition shows that participation and adherence to norms don't guarantee stability, they often guarantee misery.
The most chilling structural question is how this system persists despite the obvious escalating harm. I mean, the narrator is chemically dependent, she's often semi-comatose, constantly exploited by an artist and an unethical doctor, and she's risking her mother's fate.
The system persists because the very mechanism that allows the escape inherited wealth also provides the limitless resources necessary to maintain the harmful state. The wealth insulates her from the primary consequences that would force a person without her privilege back into reality, things like needing to earn money or losing her housing. The insulation allows the harm to continue indefinitely, or at least until the external world breaks through the bubble, which it eventually does.
Let's pivot to the present-day implications. Connecting this story from 2000 New York to our hyper-optimized culture today, the novel proves to be highly prophetic.
It offers a brilliant, almost perfect critique of the modern wellness industrial complex that is so pervasive today. Riva's obsession with extreme dieting, drinking salt water, concoctions of prune juice and baking soda, and lifestyle optimization, like the confidence-boosting CD set or pre-planning outfits on Sunday, is a clear, early precursor to today's biohacking, restrictive diet culture, and productivity rituals.
Riva is the 2000 version of the obsessive wellness influencer. She shows that even back then, the cultural anxiety surrounding performance and status was already being aggressively monetized. Riva really embodies the constant internal labor required to maintain the illusion of a successful, well-adjusted life.
And today, this manifests in elaborate morning routines, expensive tracking devices, and the pressure to constantly optimize every aspect of one's existence. It transforms anxiety into a purchasable commodity. If you're anxious, the system tells you to buy a green smoothie, not to dismantle the systems causing the anxiety. Moshfegh showed us the monetization of striving long before the internet perfected it.
This directly ties into the profound failure to disconnect in the modern age. The narrator finds that achieving true rest is impossible without chemical intervention. She tries to watch passive entertainment, but even watching the regular TV news or current events is too agitating.
She needs to chemically mute herself to perceive reality as casually as a movie or a dream. This resonates so deeply with modern burnout. If simply existing and consuming media requires active mental labor and leads to agitation, it highlights the extent to which the modern self has lost the capacity for genuine stillness or rest.
The demand to be on, to be aware, processing, and performing is so high that the only viable option for the narrator is to pharmacologically erase consciousness entirely. It suggests that contemporary life is fundamentally incompatible with the human nervous system.
Another fascinating implication is the aesthetics of poverty and opulence. The narrator's journey ends with her discarding the symbols of her old, opulent life. She gives her expensive white fox fur coat, a symbol of her mother's vanity and status, to Goodwill. She adopts radical simplicity, cornflakes, 99-cent store clothes, and reading random books she finds on the curb.
This reflects a very contemporary pattern. The privileged rejecting conspicuous consumption only to seek authenticity or aesthetic poverty. It's a performance of simplicity, a cleansing ritual that demonstrates that they are above materialism, even after they have exhausted the performance of opulence. It becomes a new form of high status to show that you don't need the trappings of your class.
It's the ultimate form of detachment. If the narrator woke up and immediately went back to designer clothes, the transformation would feel incomplete. Her adoption of minimalism signifies that she has finally rejected the value system that placed appearance above all else.
And finally, we have to revisit the price of performance in education and career, highlighted through this painful memory the narrator recalls about her college class on feminist art theory.
This anecdote perfectly encapsulates how academic and professional spaces commodify and critique personal aesthetics, rather than engaging with intellectual substance or genuine suffering. The narrator comes into class one day, heartbroken and grieving, wearing an expensive outfit and a broken stiletto heel.
Instead of anyone asking about her emotional state, the broken heel is immediately analyzed by the professor and the students as a feminist performance art piece, a commentary on the male gaze or patriarchy.
And then the professor, wanting to nail the class critique, asks the price of her shoes, almost $500. The narrator's personal pain, her grief over her parents, which is mitigated by the comfort of expensive familiar objects, was immediately translated into a political commodity, broken by the male gaze, and then reduced to a class critique, the price tag.
This systemic tendency to intellectualize, to monetize, and categorize personal pain is what fuels the narrator's rejection of the world of abstract ideas and performance. She realizes that her pain, her grief, and her appearance are simply raw material for the system to process, critique, and package. Let's situate this deep dive within our broader themes of crisis and perception. This novel offers a very clear argument about systems versus individual blame.
It really does. The temptation is to categorize the narrator simply as a lazy rich girl, but the novel argues otherwise. Her condition is the logical, if radical, outcome of a system that offered her no meaningful, non-transactional life path.
She finds the art world fake, the financial world corrupt, and even her closest relationships are completely self-serving. Her radical escape is a rational reaction to a world where, as she observes, education is directly proportional to anxiety, and talent is almost irrelevant. As Riva correctly asks, do you really need talent? The novel frames her retreat not as a moral failure, but as an existential reaction to a failed operating environment. She didn't fail the system. The system failed to provide a reason to live consciously.
The narrative also brilliantly illustrates power hidden in neutral processes. We've discussed how the narrator's inherited wealth is the invisible power protecting her, but the narrative also dissects how subtle power dynamics define every single relationship.
Trevor's suave and self-serious behavior is revealed to be deeply self-serving and transactional. It's a mechanism for his emotional maintenance. The mother-daughter dynamic, as we saw with the hemorrhoid cream and the refusal to be domestic, was defined by the mother's need for pity and her aesthetic vanity.
These seemingly neutral, everyday processes, dating, motherhood, career management, are all masked vehicles for exploitation and power maintenance. The system rewards those who can detach and use others, while punishing those who attach too deeply, just as the mother warned about oxytocin.
And finally, there is the rejection of moral narratives that are embedded in institutions. The protagonist seeks a new spirit precisely because she rejects all the established moral institutions available to her. The art world's fake subversion, the medical system's financial corruption, and Riva's borrowed self-help platitudes.
She needs to test if anything is real outside of her own chemical haze. The ultimate test of this rejection is her final act in the Metropolitan Museum, months after her hibernation ends, and she is attempting to re-enter the world.
Yes, the moment where she walks up to a still life painting, a specific one, and refuses to step back when the guard tells her to. She places her whole palm on the dry, rumbling surface of the canvas.
She is physically asserting herself into reality. She's testing the permanence of the object simply to prove to herself that there was no God stalking my soul. She's rejecting the delusion inherent in the art, the delusion that time can be contained, or that art provides immortal meaning, or that her life was meaningful before.
Her contact is a physical assertion that things were just things. Having stripped away all emotional and chemical attachments, she is finally testing the hardness of reality, free from the moral and aesthetic narratives imposed by institutions that constantly sought to commodify her.
So to conclude this deep dive, let's reflect on what my year of rest and relaxation ultimately helps us see differently about our own lives.
It forces a profound redefinition of rest itself. The novel shows that true rest or renewal in this hyper-capitalist context may require a complete cessation of cognitive and physical interaction. It reveals the profound extent to which we are constantly working just to maintain our identity, our social position, and our appearance of wellness. Sleep, for the narrator, is the only place where she isn't performing for the system or for others.
And why this perspective matters is clear. It forces you, the listener, to question the implicit value placed on constant consciousness and societal participation. If the path to becoming a new person requires eliminating the old self, the memories, the accumulated shame, the habits entirely, what does that imply about the quality of the striving, productive life we currently live? It suggests that the system is so saturated with anxiety and transaction that survival requires radical escape.
And this raises a fascinating final question that really lingers after the last page. The narrator finally wakes up, having achieved kind of strange newborn peace. This is evidenced by her ability to sleep naturally on the hard floor and her adoption of simple routines like cornflakes and reading random books. But was this peace a chemical fluke, a temporary adjustment, or a legitimate pathway to confronting her fundamental terror of infinity?
Does escaping reality for a year fundamentally prepare one to re-enter it, or does it just delay the inevitable collision? The weight of the novel's timeline adds this final, devastating layer. She achieves her personal reset just before the world has its own devastating, unavoidable system failure, the attacks of September 11th, 2001.
That collision is what lingers. She achieved a kind of personal peace and innocence, only to step back into a world that is about to lose its own sense of invincibility forever. Her small, isolated pharmaceutical crisis meets the world's large, violent, systemic crisis.
A chilling and unforgettable thought indeed about the nature of personal and collective exhaustion.
Our deep dive today was based on Ottessa Moshfegh's novel, My Year of Rest and Relaxation.
We encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author if you found these ideas valuable, or check your local library for free access.
For a shorter, visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.